Hello, everybody. This is Annie Brock. If you haven't seen me before, I'm Annie Brock, and I am the president and CEO of the Leader Transition Institute. We're a 501c3 organization headquartered in Maryland, serving people who are pivoting in their lives. We walk with them to prepare them to achieve what they want in life, to get where they want to go based on where they are. And so you'll see that I'm not in my normal habitat. I don't have a big yellow wall behind me. I am on a site in Fayetteville, North Carolina. Our team is teaching at Fort Bragg, and we are blessed beyond measure tonight to have Sue Hoppen, president of the National Military Spouse Network, with us. The National Military Spouse Network I'm going to let Sue talk all about it. It is a for-profit organization organized for the good of the community. It's a special kind of organization, so she'll talk about that. Sue and her team have, for the last several years, done a white paper on military spouse unemployment. And as I understand it, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sue, military spouse unemployment is 22% higher than regular unemployment. Do I have that right?
So it's 22%, and it's 6 to 8 times the national average.
Okay, that's even worse.
That is before the pandemic, though. So we'll get to some of those statistics, and I wish I had good news for you, but I don't.
I'm really sorry about that. And I'm here. I am really quickly here. Sue sent me her bio, and I screwed up, and I didn't download it where I have it. Quickly, here it is. So I'm going to let everybody know all your accolades here, if it'll come up quickly on my phone.
I shortened it as much as I could. I took out all of it. I think Sue Hoppen with National Military Spouse Network is just fine.
Okay. Well, Sue, then I am going to tell everybody that the floor is yours. What I want people to know is that we are recording this. It will be up for 2 days, about 48 hours. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. I will monitor the chat. We are looking forward to addressing your questions. And if Sue doesn't have an immediate answer, we will get back to you with it. Sue, the floor is yours, my friend.
Oh, thanks, Annie. And thanks for having me. This is really great. I love supporting other NMSN members, so this is wonderful. And as Annie had mentioned, actually, I'm not going to start there. I think I'm just going to start with a brief overview before I get into the solutions, because I always want to skip to the good part. But I thought that, when we had spoken, Annie, you're like, it would be helpful if we could just give a brief overview about the state of military spouse employment. Because I think because we work on the issues all the time, we just assume everyone knows about the numbers. And because we're looking at all the trends, we assumed everybody cares. And that's just not the case, right? So just some quick background information. Before the pandemic, as we discussed, military spouse employment was around 22%, but we think that coming out of the pandemic, it's going to be closer to 35 to 38%.
Oh my gosh.
I know, right? Because we used to think that 22% was an unacceptable number. And now, I never thought we'd harken back to the days of, and we're looking at 35 to 38%. Of the military spouses who said that their family needed 2 incomes to meet their needs, only 59% had a full or part-time job. And remember, this is all pre-pandemic. And it's not just unemployment that we're talking about. We're also talking about underemployment. So 35% of military spouses said that they were overqualified for the job that they have. New data points are putting, the military spouse unemployment rate, we talked about 35 to 30%, but we also know that military spouses, like everyone else, have been, affected by the pandemic and having to leave the workforce in droves because of caregiving needs.
Right.
So that's also tracking. There's lots of movement on the licensing and certification front, but this only affects approximately 30% of military spouses. So it's not a silver bullet solution. A lot of people talk about licensing and certification and the headway that we've made in getting that to over 33 states. Mm-hmm. Now, some sort of accommodation in place for military spouses who require licensing or certification as part of their jobs. But that doesn't affect the majority of spouses, right? We know that more military spouses are engaging in freelancing and entrepreneurship as portable career options, as evidenced by our NMSN members. We've seen more military spouses who, as they're moving, they realize, I could either continue looking for work every time I move somewhere, or I can just try to build my own business and move my business as I PCS from place to place.
Right.
We know that freelancing is a big option for military spouses now, which they're taking advantage of.
Good.
We also have a number of military spouse hiring authorities and preferences out there, but we've never measured the efficacy of these programs. And from our vantage point, we think that if you can't measure them, then you don't know if they're effective at achieving their goal. So are they getting more military spouses hired? Are they getting more military spouses into the federal government? Are they achieving their intended purpose? And if they're not, maybe it's time to change the equation, right? Maybe it's time to try something else. And speaking of data, like we talk about, like just measuring efficacy, we actually don't have a whole lot of granular data around military spouse employment. And the information that we do have is woefully out of date. We talk about this all the time, but the last time there was a comprehensive report on military spouse employment, it was in 2004. That was
That's a ancient history now.
17 years ago, right? And think about that. That was before the advent of telework, really the prevalence of telework. That was really before the rise in entrepreneurship among the military spouse community. That was before the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So we may not even be measuring a whole swath of the military spouse demographic.
Crazy.
Right? I mean, if this is the data that DoD is using to pull together their programs and resources, I don't have a lot of confidence that they're going to be doing a good job, because it's all out of date. Like,
I agree.
Let's measure the experience. Let's really measure the military spouse experience that we're talking about. Like, let's really help the people who are currently in the force.
And so when they talk, in the big scheme of things, to me, then it makes me think that every time they talk about military families, that they really don't have a clue. If they don't have a clue about what's going on with military spouse employment for 17 years.
I think that there have been other reports, smaller reports, that will speak to underemployment, or will speak to a certain segment, right? Or will speak to a certain service branch. Because if the Army decides that they want to survey their spouses, then there'll be a Army spouse survey, or Air Force, whatever, right? But there hasn't been like a DoD RAND level report since 2004. And we think it's really going to take something of that magnitude to really get to the crux of the issue. And we cannot fix what we can't measure, right? How can you improve if you don't have a baseline? That's just the basics. And if you don't understand what you're trying to fix, what are you fixing then? You're fixing the problems from 17 years ago, or are you always going to be reactionary? We think that it just is going to require some strategic thinking that starts with good data sets.
I agree, and I guess knowing how things go with our country and with our government, somehow I'm not surprised that the good data sets don't exist. But then again, I'm still amazed that no one is measuring it.
So we've, we'll talk about this when we talk about our white paper, but we've had some good success in getting a request for a report into the NDA for the past 2 years, but it's always been traded away in conference, and so it's never gone through. But we think this is really, really important. That's why we keep talking about it. But before we get to that stuff, I want to talk a little bit about the good news, because I gave you all that bad news. So just a couple pieces of good news.
Okay.
And I never thought that there'd be a silver lining to this whole COVID pandemic, but there has been one really big silver lining, and that is that it has reduced the stigma around remote work. And this presents an opportunity for military spouses, because if nothing else, military spouses are the most resilient, the most adaptable, and the biggest can-do group that we know. We will flex to make it work, right? To our clients, it is going to be transparent to them if we're PCSing, because we're just going to get it done. So the fact that more employers may now be coming around to remote work presents a really great opportunity for military spouses. We're already self-starters. We already know how to keep ourselves moving, keep the momentum going. So we're prime candidates for remote work. So this is one of the silver linings of COVID.
Yeah.
The other one is Congress recognizes that there are issues, and they recognize that they have a role to play in helping us. And so there is some legislation that's been introduced to help us. And so this is all really great news. And I think that brings me now to your point about what NMSN has been doing. So NMSN has been around for 11 years now, this month, 11 years. And, about 3 years ago, we looked around and we're like, there are a lot of, so back because we didn't read the bio, I guess that the one thing we did miss out on is that, I'm not new to the space. I've been in this space for over 2 decades, and I started at the Military Officers Association. I started their spouse programs there, and I cut my teeth there. And then I left because I'm like, I think that I need an organization. We all need an organization that focuses just on professional military spouses. Because 11 years ago, you saw that all the programs were really going toward the spouses who may not have had degrees yet, which is where it should go, right? That's where the funding should go. Mm-hmm. But there were a bunch of us who already had degrees, who already had businesses, who already in progress of our careers, who were kind of being left behind because there wasn't really anything for us. And so we knew it was a really niche market, but we're like, this is a market that needs to be supported. And that was the genesis of NMSN, the National Military Spouse Network. It was always our intent to help military spouses figure out, very much like what you do, to help military spouses figure out a way to balance both their own career goals and the military lifestyle. Because in the end, I think we all believe that the U.S. is best served with an all-volunteer force, and that in order to recruit and retain the best and the brightest, if a military spouse wants to work, they should be able to work, because a service member should never have to choose between what's best for his country versus what's best for his or her family, right?
Right.
So we think that's why it's so important. Military spouse employment is so important to national security. And that kind of fuels everything we do. So with that thought in mind, we took that big holistic look at spouse employment, and we looked at all the research, all the data out there. We realized people were doing really good work, but they stopped just short of making recommendations about what needed to happen to change the status quo. And we're like, we can do this. We can take a stab at this. I remember funding that first white paper. I'm like, I'm just going to do this out of hide. I think this is really important to do. So we found a writer, a very talented writer who worked on a GAO report about spouse employment. We're like, what do you think about doing this? But I want it to be written in layman's terms. I want it to make sense for people. I want them to be able to pick it up. And it's a quick read. I think it's like a 10 to 12 minute read every year. That's our goal. Lay out the history behind every single recommendation, and that's it, right? You don't need a PhD to read it. And we've been really, really fortunate in that every single one of our recommendations so far, knock on wood, fingers crossed, up until this year, every single one of our recommendations that required policy change has been introduced as potential legislation.
That's really a huge success. Congratulations.
Yeah, we might not be there after this year, but we're still gonna make those ambitious recommendations. Mm-hmm. But one of the recommendations that actually would go far in changing the spouse employment landscape, because one of the things about spouse employment is everybody wants to help, but the reality is we can bring employers to the table and they can set metrics to hire military spouses, but those are internal metrics. There is no government requirement for anybody to hire military spouses. Do you remember? I know you remember because you yourself are a veteran. A few years ago, the veteran unemployment rate was 4 times the national average.
Right.
And people put a lot of time and attention in attacking this problem because it was unacceptable. Our veterans should not come back and be unemployed. And they were very successful. One of the things they did was they expanded the work opportunity tax credit to include eligible veterans, and that provided employers an incentive to hire veterans by giving them a tax incentive.
Right. That's
just one mechanism they use to lower, unemployment among veterans.
Right.
We think that they should do the same thing for military spouses. Other categories that are included are like summer youth hires, or rehabilitate ex-felons. Maybe military spouses are not a bridge too far. Maybe, if we can include that group, maybe we should just think about adding military spouses in there as well. It would actually be the first time that a metric existed or a mechanism existed to encourage employers to hire military spouses and incentivize them to do so. Otherwise, we're just at the whim of corporations who are fantastic hiring military spouses, who get it, who set internal metrics, look at USAA, who says, look, we're going to hire 25% of our workforce, and I think it might be higher for them, are now going to be either veterans or military spouses. But that's internal. That's what they do because they want to do it. But how do we scale that? How do we bring that to all the small and medium-sized businesses? Because while we'd all love to live in a location where they're big corporations, you're at Fort Bragg. How many big, tall buildings do you see, skyscrapers do you see with big names on it? I'm thinking zero.
I hadn't seen any, so.
Because I remember the Chateau Hotel was like the tallest building in town. I mean, that's a big building. So we need to incentivize some of those mom and pops businesses, the small, medium-sized businesses,
Right.
military spouses. That's the kind of out-of-the-box thinking and bold idea that's really going to turn things around.
And that would be sustainable too, while also providing a pool of employees who are really capable and willing to work.
Right. And it's really just letting military spouses get their foot in the door. And then it's up to us to keep the job, right? And anybody who's hired military spouse only wants to hire other military spouses because we're hard workers. And so that would just be a game changer. Any kind of mechanism we could have like that would incentivize employers to hire military spouses would be, I think, what would be required. Another one would be to change the conversation. I think we have done a very good job, a moderately good job, some people would say, of getting military spouses hired. I don't think that's the solution. That's the problem anymore. That is certainly a problem, but it's only half the problem. The other half of the problem is retention. How do we keep military spouses employed through a PCS?
Right.
Because if you can't keep them employed, then you have the same cycle every 3 years.
Right. And the other thing that I'm thinking of is not only is it the same cycle for the military spouse, it's a cycle that the business has to go through.
Yes. Right.
And what I've seen is that it costs nearly an average business, it costs nearly the equivalent of an employee's salary to replace them. And so if there was an incentive for medium to small businesses to hire military spouses, not only would they be getting really great qualified employees, they would be hanging on to them.
Yeah. And I mean, and when we talk about telework and we talk about remote work, if someone's doing something like graphic design or social media or marketing, why couldn't they do that for you at Fort Bragg, even if you hired them when you were in DC? So it's just going to take a different way of looking at work. And we love being part of that conversation and, that white paper. So the way our cycle starts is, we look at all the research, all the information that's out there supporting spouse employment, underemployment, and unemployment, because we don't want to duplicate efforts, right? We don't want to do something that other people are already doing. And we think there's a lot of great data out there that can be extrapolated. And, and so we just look at everything that's being done. We look for the gaps, we look for the opportunities, and we look for areas that could be improved. And then we pull those all into recommendations. And then from there, we convene roundtable discussions with stakeholders. So one of them is always with the VSOs and MSOs that support spouse employment.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll get them, because, it takes a village, right? And we don't want to do anything in a silo. So we talk to those organizations, we let them know what's going on, give them the opportunity to jump on board, talk to us and explain to them, the recommendations. We also talk to congressional staffers. We take it right to them and we say, these are the pain points that military spouses are experiencing. These are some of the recommendations. This is how these would fix those pain points.
Right. And so Sue, I know that right now you're in the middle of doing those visits, the 2021 visits. What are you hearing from the congressional offices as you talk to them?
They're always very positive. They always really want to help. And the one thing about spouse issues, and I don't want to speak for veteran issues, but I have a feeling it would be the same. Military issues are nonpartisan issues, and they're actually bipartisan issues. So when you look at the reintroduction of the WOTC, the Work Opportunity Tax Credit that Congressman Delgado put forth, he did it with 5 co-sponsors, 5 bipartisan co-sponsors. So there were 3, including Delgado, to be 6. So there were 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats. And so it's really interesting to me that we live in a society that is a little bit fragmented right now, but everybody can come together to support the military, which I think is so amazing, especially going into Memorial Day weekend. I think it's just, that's what we're hearing is like, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican, we're just hearing positive things and they're all willing to work together and they're all very positive. Like, what can we do to help the military? What can we do to help spouses? It's been a great experience, and then it starts with the roundtable, so we talk to the staffers and then we generate more conversations. And then, we have two others. One is a working group, and the other one is with the spouses. At the end of the year, we actually go back and we convene military spouses for a conversation and say, "Hey, this is how we started off 2021. This is where we're ending up." And so it's kind of like a year in review. Like, this is what's improved. This is what's kind of stayed the same. This is what still needs to be done. And then through that all, we're like, I don't think it's enough to do this. I think it'd be really great if, we have Military Spouse Appreciation Day every year. And I think that our NMSN population is really not the kind that wants another plaque or another carnation or rose at a luncheon. We're servant leaders and we want to help. Like, we want to make it better for our community. So about 3 years ago, it was kind of risky, but we're like, how about we flip this on its head? And instead of Military Spouse Appreciation Day being about us, how about we make it about the people who support us year round? So we convened a day of advocacy. And what we did was we asked military spouses to come alongside us and go visit their legislators on Military Spouse Appreciation Day. Thank them for the support they've already given, and then encourage them to continue supporting our military spouse community. And what we really wanted to do was just get military spouses in front of their legislators, share their stories, talk about the pain points, and talk about the kind of changes it would require to really make a difference. And, I just think that it's important for everybody to have skin in the game. And I can't, as a leader of an organization, care more about people's careers than they care about them themselves, because I refuse to advocate for something that you don't care about. Because if you don't care about spouse employment, then I should stop caring about spouse employment. I should move on and do something else. Right. You need to care about your livelihood, your career. You need to care about those in your command as much as I do. And so that means you get skin in the game. That means you're visiting the legislators. You tell them your stories, because I'm not their constituent. I have my own legislators. I'm only, I only have 3 people I'm a constituent of. Those are the 3 people I can visit. Well, everybody else needs to carry the rest of the load. And so it was really great. And I mean, the first year we had over 24 people come. They visited over 57 offices. That was the first time in the 116th Congress we got the WOTC legislation introduced, which was amazing. And then this year, we're just coming off of it. We did it online, which means we get people from like multiple different states. Last year it was 17 different states, 2 different countries. Right. And it's really empowering because the spouses are like, first they get addicted. They can't stop. They're visiting. They're like, I'm not even from that state, but I went to school there and I touched, I drove through it. So I'm going to call them. So it's kind of cool. But it's really great to see them taking ownership of the issues and the solutions, because then what we're creating is this empowered group of advocates who are no longer victims, right? Like, it's not something that somebody else is going to fix. It's something that we're going to fix as a community, which I think is so powerful, because as soon as you take that power back, then you know that you can solve the problem. I mean, what I wanted us to get out of was that notion that we had to wait for someone to come in and save us. I'm like, we're going to fix this ourselves. And so we've been really happy with the last 3 years, the white paper and the Day of Advocacy, and just growing this community of advocates. And the thing that always gets to me, and I'll just leave on this and hopefully we'll have some questions, but the thing that always gets to me is when the people come alongside us to advocate, most of us are not going to benefit for the changes that we're advocating for. So they're really doing it for the next generation. Right. So these are people who are taking time out of their schedules, out of their busy lives, to advocate for the next generation. And so when you talk about entitled military spouses, or you talk about the negative stereotypes, we don't see that here, because the spouses that we see are the ones who have just taken upon themselves to make things better for the next generation. And so how are you not just inspired by that, right? And then it just serves to remind you that we serve the best community in the world. That's why it's such an honor and a privilege to do the work that we do. Well,
I'm just gobsmacked listening to you, Sue. I've been a member of NMSN for a while, but I honestly haven't been as involved as I probably should be, even just paying attention to everything that you do, because you guys have been running with it so hard. So I have, but I'm really proud to be able to say that I'm a member, and proud that you guys are doing the work. I have my immediate questions are two immediate questions. One, what is the piece of legislation that has gone through since you started working and doing the white papers that you're most proud of, that you think has made the biggest difference for spouses going forward? And second of all, which out of the issues that you're advocating for right now when you are talking to members of Congress, which is the most important?
So we haven't had anything go through law yet because it takes forever. The WOTC has already been reintroduced in the 117th. For me right now, we don't get to choose which one gets introduced. So when they get introduced, then that becomes the most important because it's already been introduced, right? So then we can point people to it and get co-sponsors. Okay. I'm proud by the fact that when they reintroduced the WOTC legislation in the 117th, and then we went to Storm. They introduced it on just a couple days before Military Spouse Appreciation Day. And then we sent the spouses up there to advocate on the Hill. Mm-hmm. And within a week, or maybe it was 2 weeks, they had 21 co-sponsors. In 2 weeks, 32 co-sponsors.
That's great work.
Right? This is just a bunch of dedicated military spouses. And, our partners on the Hill who are also making those calls and everything, which is amazing. I like the WOTC legislation just because it would be the first time there is any sort of incentive to hire military spouses. And I think that's an important first step. I don't think it's enough. I think we still need that report. We still need that RAND level report because we cannot improve what we cannot measure. And if we can't measure it, then it's easy to just shove it off to the side and go, we think it's a problem. We don't know it's a problem. Well, we need them to know it's a problem, right? And so we need that report. So to me, I think if I had to choose, you're making me do like a Sophie's choice. If I had to choose, I think I would choose the report because we need the data. But we're also going after, our last recommendation this year was about small business and like entrepreneurship. And there was a Veterans Employment and Entrepreneurship Act of 1999 that set the metric for small business contracting with the federal government, which set that at 3%. And we're like, maybe they could expand that to include military spouses. I think what's going to end up happening is that we're going to try to establish military spouses as a business concern for the SBA. Because the SBA business concerns are like veteran-owned businesses, women, minority-owned, and others. And if all military spouses were women, that'd be great, but we're not. So having military spouses as a business concern under the SBA would fold in our male military spouses.
That's excellent. I love that idea. And that is an important concern. For today's military, it has been all along. Not all military spouses have been women, but even more so with today's military, many more spouses are also men. And when there should be legislation and set-asides that account for military spouses as a class, not just really based on a gender.
Yeah, no. So we think so it's hard to choose because we think the WOTC is important because it would set that incentive. We think this small business would be important because it would acknowledge that military spouses are male and female. Right. We think the report is important because it would bring in the data that we need to really start fixing some of these problems. Because even though we've thrown a lot of money and a lot of effort, and DOD's done a great job of like supporting military spouses for the past decade, it's still remaining around 22, 24%. I mean, that is just unacceptable. It's going to take out of the box thinking to fix this. It's going to take looking at retention as much as recruiting. It's going to take measuring the efficacy of these programs. Like, we just need to stop talking about these things as potential problems, recognize that they're problems, and start fixing them. Like, look at our spouses overseas that can't find jobs because we're not addressing the SOFA issue. Like, we're not asking you to reopen the SOFA and renegotiate that. We're asking, like, let's just, for a first step, acknowledge that the SOFA is an issue. And as a second step, let's put the SOFA information by country in front of a firewall. Not all the SOFA information, just let spouses know, if I go to Japan, yes, I can work on the economy. I can't work on the installation, whatever. I can have a business. No. If I go to Germany, it's no down the board. I just need to know so that when they're filling out the dream sheet, which everybody will ignore, but like when they're filling out the dream sheet, they can at least know that they stand to have a better chance if they go to this location versus that location. Or maybe we don't volunteer to go overseas because my career can't withstand it. But we need to make it possible for the service member and the spouse to have that kind of transparency in information when they're trying to make these important decisions.
Agreed. I'm amazed that information is not readily available. I'm shocked to hear that information, the SOFA information, just the basics about whether spouses are eligible to work on the installation or on the economy by country isn't available.
Yeah, I think that would be a really simple fix. I mean, because we're not asking for like basing, we're not asking about like acquisitions or anything. We're just asking like, hey, top line information. Can they work? Can they not work by country? That's it.
Right. There's no national security for any country involved in that. Simple question, simple answer. So, Sue, I'm seeing that Trish had I love Trish's question. She asked if people could sign up anywhere now to be on next year's advocacy and action movement with NMSN. Are you?
Yeah, so we are gonna open up signups really shortly. We haven't closed out this year yet because we're keeping it all the way to the end of May this year because people are still generating meetings. I told you that we have more meetings today, tomorrow, and Friday, and so people are still generating meetings. And so as soon as this year's ends, we're going to open up sign up again. And I hope Trish signs up. She's really good at it. But what we'd hope people would do is sign up for the newsletter and then follow us on Facebook at NMS Network. Network, and then that helps them stay up to date. And whenever that registration goes up, they'll know. And if they sign up for the newsletter, they can do that at the link that you just posted.
And so they want to look for the NMSN network on Facebook. I'm going to put that here too.
And that's really the easiest way because that's where you put, the most up-to-date information. So there's only one N on Facebook. So it's NMS Network.
Oops. So I need to change that. NMS Network.
There you go. But yeah, you'll get to us. If you go to our website, you'll get to us. But that's a great question, Trish. Thank you. We hope a lot of people will sign up to advocate with us. That's exactly right. We hope a lot of people will sign up to advocate with us next year because it's a lot of fun. And because we need people from every state and we need people from every district. And it's not too late. If you think that military...
Well, that's what I was just going to ask you. So for this year, is it too late? Or if somebody wanted to join the bandwagon and reach out to their congressmen and women for this year, they could reach out to you. And would they do that at the website?
It's actually simpler than that. What they should do is go to congress.gov. And this is really fun. I'm sure you've done this because you're very active in advocacy, but you go to congress.gov and you put in HR 2974. HR 2974.
So congress.gov and then put in HR
2974.
2974.
And they can see if their congressman has already signed up to be a co-sponsor. And if they have not, they can give them a call, send them a note and say, hey, I believe in this legislation and I think that you should join as a co-sponsor. It's bipartisan legislation that supports military spouse employment. The unemployment rate among military spouses is we think it's going to be anywhere from 35 to 38%, coming out of the pandemic, and it's unacceptable. And this would be a solution.
Awesome.
So they can do that. It's very simple and it's kind of fun because, you can everyone should have their congressman on speed dial, maybe not on a speed dial. That'd be weird. But, they should know how to contact their congressional members because I think civic engagement is one of our responsibilities as Americans, right? Like we should know how to engage with our legislators more than when we go to the polls to vote for them. Like they work for us. We should make them work for us.
That makes sense for us. That makes sense to me. Perfect. Okay. Well, awesome. So I'm going to ask, does anybody who is on with us right now have a question that they'd like to ask Sue about military spouse employment? And I'm just putting up Jane Babcock's comment. Jane, thanks for being on with us tonight. She had great compliments about military spouses, and so I want to make sure that everybody saw this.
Oh, thank you, Jane.
Jane is in Wisconsin. So, Jane, if you haven't reached out to your representatives, I hope that you'll go to look at 974 and see if they are co-sponsors.
And it's fun to do. It's really fun because I think the spouses enjoy it the most when they reach out to their congressional members and then they see them co-sponsor. It just feels like a personal victory. And what they've been hearing is most of them come back and they're like, the staffers just say, this is a no-brainer. this is a no-brainer. We should be co-sponsoring this. And so they just love it. It's fun. I don't think there's very few things you could do with very little input that is going to give you that kind of output, which is kind of cool.
And it's a great quick reward for the effort that you put in with a huge long-term reward possibility.
Yeah, just think of what you'd be doing for all those spouses out there in national security. It's just amazing. It's just an amazing opportunity. If you feel the move. If you don't agree with it, don't do it.
But who doesn't want military spouses to be employed?
Right.
Yeah, I think that is just key.
It really is. And we talk about it through the lens of financial security. And, because you deal with transition. And so I think service members, having gone through this, I think service members do better in transition if the spouse is employed, and even better if they're employed with benefits, right? Because then that gives a service member a little more runway to find the job that they really want, rather than having to take the first job they're offered because they want to make that family obligation.
That's exactly right. And we are doing a session, as I said, right now here at Fort Bragg. And I was talking to one of our participants today, and that's exactly what he said. His wife has a very good job with benefits. And so he is really able to focus on finding something where he will be a really good fit. And it can be something long-term, as opposed to having to take the first job that he gets offered, whether he thinks he's going to be happy there or not, whether it could be for the long-term, just to make sure that the family budget stays on track.
Yeah, no. So we really think that it's very important when you're talking about transition for the long-term financial security of the family. So,
yeah. And that in itself is a national security issue. It's all tied. It's all woven together. It's one thread.
Yeah.
So Jane has a question here. She said, she says, curious, with military service being generational and caregiving often becoming the veteran spouse or the younger generation spouse, how do you teach the numerous and impacting VA benefits? Yes. How are you doing anything to help spouses learn about their VA benefits?
No. And, one of the trends, I actually sit on the VA advisory committee on education. And so we're learning about the VA benefits. And one of the trends is TAP is actually being split. So now military spouses have the option of going through a TAP type program through the Department of Labor and the VA. And the information that's taught at labor is not the VA benefits. So they're doing all employment stuff. And so I think there's this expectation out there that everybody thinks they're going to get VA benefits regardless of where they go through TAP or transition. And that's not going to be the case. So no, we have not touched that. And we actually do not get a lot of military spouses coming through NMSN that are going through the transition immediately. We get more people who are like middle career. But if that were something that our spouses wanted, that would be something that we would pivot to and have presentations. I actually used to, when I was at MOA, I was in the benefits information department. So it was actually my job to go out and brief people on their benefits, their military benefits, their VA benefits. So I do know the importance of that. And I guess I also wrote A Family's Guide to the Military for Dummies. So I am a huge proponent of knowing your benefits, knowing your resources. And we have not done a great job of getting that out there through NMSN. One of the things we have done, though, is we've done a weekly straight talk. And so we're able to address those issues in little sound bites. So it's not like a huge TAP session for like 2 days. We'll deal with one issue. At the end of June, we actually have somebody coming on to talk about SBP and insurance, replacement for SGLI. And so we'll do it in little chunks.
Right. And that's important. It's very important to educate. We do a whole segment on finances and then additional pieces to go more in depth. So thank you for that. So thank you so much, Sue, for spending some time together with us tonight. Your white paper is vital. And so I'm going to put the website back up here one more time, because I want people to know that they can go to the National Military Spouse Network.org and to download the white paper that the organization has done to focus on the spouse employment issues. They are advocating not for themselves necessarily, because so many of the military spouses that are involved in the programs right now in doing this work, their husbands are later in their careers, and so the people who will benefit from all this work are the incoming military spouses, the mid-career military spouses. So thank you so much for all the work that you're doing for everybody. We really appreciate it. I want to let everybody know that if you go to, I'm going to put up the LTI website here, leadertransitioninstitute.org is where you're going to find out more information about LTI. If you go to the changing focus section of it, you'll find the registration for our June and July events coming up. I'm going to say a shout out to our cohort 20, which is our current cohort here at Fort Bragg. Thank you to the organizations that have brought us in. We are available, and we have more virtual sessions going on every month, but we are available for in-person sessions when we can find a sponsor to bring us to an area. So we're having a great time here at Fort Bragg and looking forward to going to other places. Thank you so much to Sue for being on. Thank you for those of you who have been on with us tonight, Trish and Jane, and those of you who are going to listen in the future. We are both Sue and her organization, the National Military Spouse Network, and me and LTI. We are here because we want to serve you. It is all for you. So thank you for doing the hard work that you do as members of the military, spouses of the military, and we look forward to seeing you again another night.
Thanks, guys.
Okay, bye-bye.